PodcastOne presents the Steve Austin Show Classics.
I'm sitting here in the Broken Skull Ranch talking to Leon White, also known around the world as Big Van Vader, coming to me from, where you at, Leon? You in Boulder, Colorado today?
Boulder, Colorado, buddy.
God dang, man. We've been talking about getting together on a podcast and shooting a breeze, and you reached out to me through an email, and it was so good to hear from you because I've been wanting to get you on the show and just really basically wondering in general how you were doing because I hadn't heard from you in so many years. How you feeling right now?
Steve, I'm feeling good. I mean, I'm probably in better shape than I've been in the last 20 years. Physically, mentally, things are going well. You know, I'm in the gym every day, and I'm on the road a little bit here, so things are going good. And you know, talking about knowing you, how long do we go back? We met, in the...
Man, early 90s in WCW. And I don't even remember the first time we met. Do you?
No, I know, buddy. Tell me.
No, I don't know. I don't remember. I just remember we hit it off, and, man, you had a hell of a run in WCW as the lead heel, but we're just shooting a breeze on a family-friendly show. There's going to be an S-bomb here or there drop, but we're not going to drop any F-bombs while we're talking on this hour. Man, I want to go back to your beginnings because, you know, hell, I'd forgot. You know, you've been from Boulder, Colorado for so long, or living out in that area. You know, I just assumed that's where you're from. But little did I know that you were born in L.A.
I was born in Compton, California. Actually, I was the hospital, St. Francis Hospital in Linwood, but we were living in Compton. And tell you what, buddy, you grew up fast in that part of Los Angeles in the 60s. You got consumed.
Now, quite frankly, I mean, you know, Compton's, you don't get a whole lot of white folks living in Compton. But back in the 60s, were there a lot more white people in Compton at the time?
Yeah, you know, it was probably about a 60-40 deal.
Right.
And my mother had an aunt that lived there. She had a big, nice home in Compton. And my mother had her sister, my aunt. And we kind of settled next to her. My dad was working. He was a Navy diver, and he could weld underwater. So he worked down in San Pedro, and from Compton, that was just 10, 15 minutes away. So it was a good spot for us to live. And we lived right there on the boulevard, right next to Compton College. And, you know, when we got there when I was a young kid, it was a nice place to live. And as time went on, it got more dominant in terms of, you know, a lot of I really don't know how to say this, but a lot of the white people were leaving town, and the neighborhood was becoming more of a black neighborhood. And you know, it was a rough place to grow up. I mean, you know, you wanted to live in Compton, California, you had to earn it. Let's put it that way.
Well, how long were you there? Because you went to Bell High School, right? Because that's not Compton High School. How'd you end up over at Bell?
My father, he invented that electric hoist where they hoist cars up and work on the mufflers underneath?
Yeah.
Okay, well, my dad actually invented that and sold it for, I think, $2,000 to a couple guys, and then they became millionaires. And my dad had actually built the first one because he was a welder, and he was getting in those pits. What they used to do is drive cars over a little pit in the ground, and you'd get in there and lay on your back and weld these mufflers and fix them and stuff like that. And he kind of was, he was a smart man and pretty creative in those types of things. And he built this hoist, and it just lifted it up, and you could stand there and cut this thing off and work. And he didn't know what he had, and he sold it, and guys mass-produced that and, you know, made millions of dollars in Los Angeles, you know, and all these muffler shops across the country now got them. So we were doing pretty well, and he was making good money. We moved out to Anaheim and bought one of those little houses. You know, they had tore down one of those orange groves and built some real small single-family homes, and then from there we migrated back to Bell, and where I went to school at Bell High.
Now, dude, you've always been a big guy. We were talking earlier, and your mother was like 4 feet, how many inches tall?
Well, my mom, God bless her, Steve, thank you for bringing that up. She's the love of my life, I'll tell you what. She's 4'10", and just tougher than nails, and she's 87-year-old today. She walks a half hour a day. She'll outlive me, that's for sure. But
where's she living now?
She lives in Sonora, California.
Okay.
Up there, my sister and brother are up there, and it's a little mountain town, just a couple hours north of Sacramento, and they like it up there. It's about 3,500 feet, so they don't get much snow, and it's a little bit cooler in the summers. You know, Sacramento gets pretty hot now, and they're doing great. But anyway, she was 4'10", and the doctor grabbed my dad and said, "Hey, you know, we don't know what you got in there, but it's big, and you need to come out now." So at 7 months and 3 weeks, I came out at 10 pounds and 16 ounces and 23.5 inches long. And I guess the thinking on that was, if they did not induce labor when they did, that, you know, it probably would have killed my mom, you know, giving me birth. I was just too big for her.
Man,
and my dad was a big guy. He was 6'4", and my grandpa was 6'6", and redheaded guy. So, you know, I got my size from my dad's side of the family, obviously.
So then you start growing up. Are you bigger than everybody in every single class you're in?
Yeah, you know, for a long time there. I mean, I kind of felt out of place. I was a little bit awkward socially. I was, you know, fourth grade. I'm a foot taller than everybody, and you know, 50, 60, 70 pounds heavier than everybody. And I was overweight, but I wasn't fat. I was big.
Right.
I remember my dad his thing was he used to cook breakfast on Sunday morning, Steve, and that was his thing. And boy, he could cook. He'd, you know, eggs and sausage and bacon and pancakes and just anything you want, grits, and he that was his deal. And you know, I polished off 10, 15 eggs and some pancakes, and I got up from that table, and I guess he took a look at I stood up and turned my back and stretched my hands, and I was all of about, 7 or 8 years old, and he looked at me and said, "Son, you got to do something, because you're just getting too big too fast." And so he grabbed me by the wrist and took me down to Pop Warner football and signed me up. Thought that the exercise would do me good. And they said, "Well, how old is your son?" And he said, "Well, he's, you know," and I don't really remember. I was 7 or 8, and they said, "Well, he'd have to play with the, you know, either the 9 and 10-year-olds and maybe the 10 or 11-year-olds." And let me tell you something, Steve. That's a big difference when you're that age. And,
yeah, right. It is.
I literally got the you know what beat out of me. I got on that scale, and they said, "You know what? He can play 10 years old, but he's going to have to lose, you know, 20 pounds to do that." So that's the ball career started, and you know, kind of went on from there.
Okay, so you go to high school, and you're playing at Bell High School. You're All-American. You're all Los Angeles. And you were telling me that, hell, the all Los Angeles team was tougher to make than the All-American team. Was the competition, the roster of talent coming from that area that deep?
Well, buddy, let me tell you what. And you know, Steve, I know you're from Texas, and I've had some heated conversations with people from Texas, and there's a lot of good football states and cities, you know, Los Angeles, California. I mean, they put out a lot of good football players, and Texas is certainly one of them. But just for the record, you know, and I understand Los Angeles has a lot of people in it. They've got over 800 high schools now, and back then it was 500 or 600 high schools. So just in sheer numbers, you know, Los Angeles puts out more high school All-Americans, more college All-Americans, more pros, more All-Pros, and more Hall of Fame football players than any other city in the country. So we played good football, and you know, competition breeds excellence. And I think we lost 2 football games in 4 years of my career. So we were in the city championships every year, and you know, you could make All-State, you could make All-American, and you could make All-Conference. But the hardest team to make was that All Los Angeles team, and I was fortunate enough to make that All Los Angeles team, because, like I said, there's some good football players in Los Angeles. And you know, you look on that roster, that first team All Los Angeles team back in my era, and you'll see guys go on to college and pros and you know, All Pro and et cetera, et cetera. So
you're there at Bell High School, Leon. What position on the line are you playing?
Well, I was an offensive and defensive tackle. I was a 2-way starter at Bell High, and I love playing defense. I mean, that was really my position, and probably just wasn't quite fast enough, you know.
So is that why that when you went to Colorado, that's why you stayed at offensive line?
Yeah, in other words, when they recruited me. I had a bunch of sacks in high school and a bunch of tackles, and kind of thought of an offensive lineman as being my second position. I could play it and I could do well at it, but I, you know, just my love and my heart was at that defensive spot, either the inside tackle or the outside tackle. And you know, I'd even shift back into a linebacker from time to time, because you know, on the high school level, I could run with those guys. But, you got into college and guys are faster, and they looked at me and said, well, you're a center and a guard. And so I got to the University of Colorado and started out at guard, and started my freshman year, and ended up being all conference and all American at guard my junior year. And then I moved out to tackle, Steve, and we played both sides. So I started at all 5 offensive line positions, and I was a preseason All-American at tackle going into my first senior year, and it was against Texas Tech, and I ruptured a cartilage, that medial meniscus. So I got redshirted, got my 5th year, moved into center, and really kind of found my home. I love center, and it turned out, the lateral movement I had, snap that ball and cut off that front side one technique. And that, for those of people that don't understand that, is you got to play running to the right, and you're the center, and you got a man in that front side gap. In other words, you got to cut him off, and he's already 2 feet to the right of you, right where the play's going, and you got to get your body on the other side of him and cut him off. So when you talk about a center cutting off that front side technique, that one technique, that's hard to do. And moved on to the Los Angeles Rams, and played for a few years, and was participated in that Super Bowl that the Rams played in, and never started as a professional football player. There was a gentleman by the name of Rich Saul, and he had that center position also. He was a 16, 17-year All-Pro, and boy, I'll tell you what, he was good. And being center in the NFL is, it's about being big and strong, but it's more about experience and knowledge than anything. And this guy was an All-Pro and the best. And it wasn't about beating him out. It was about waiting until he got done and gave it up.
Right.
And then, and that's just the bottom line. And that guy was that good. So I was in a preseason game, and I had played 3 quarters of that preseason game against the Dallas Cowboys. And you might remember this coming from Texas. You remember a guy named Randy White? He's a Hall of Famer.
Man, I barely remember that guy. Yes, everybody in the world, and especially from Texas, knows Randy White.
Randy White, when he was, I was scared to death, and Randy was starting, and I said, Leon, here's your shot. You wanted it, and I said, well, who's Randy White? And I went, oh my God. But I shut Randy White out for 3 quarters, and no tackles, no sacks. I shut him out.
So how was going head-to-head with Randy White?
He's Hall of Famer. What do you say? I mean, he had the speed and the strength. He was a 500+ pound bench presser back then, and really had moved in from linebacker. So the thing that I matched up well with Randy is I had quickness and I had strength to match his. And then Randy, being a linebacker, he didn't have the long arms.
Right.
And really, if I was coming up today, I'd be a good football player, and I might still get up into the NFL. But the NFL offensive guards, not necessarily the centers, but the offensive guards and the tackles, Steve, they have longer arms, and these guys are recruited for this. And it's simple as that the defensive linemen have longer arms. So if you're a big, strong offensive guard and your arms are 4 inches shorter than that guy across the line from you, just pure mathematics and sheer geometry is going to tell you he's going to get his hands on you first. And boy, that's a big deal. And then when he's got his hands on you first, and you can't, and you don't have a hold of him, you can't get a grasp on him, he's going to beat you.
Right.
So in today's NFL, I would definitely be a center today, because it's more about positioning than it is, having longer arms. So the thing that I matched up well with Randy is he was a linebacker converted to a defensive tackle, so his arms wasn't real long, and got on a sweep, Steve, and I cut back to catch cornerback that was slicing in backside to get the tailback on a sweep right, and I planted my right leg, and boy, that patellar tendon just exploded, and that was it, boy. I woke up and took the big hit from the cornerback because I planted that leg, and boy, he stuck his helmet right under my jaw, and I woke up, and I was out, and I kind of sat up, and I couldn't see my right leg, and where did that go? And I looked, and it just made, at the knee joint, it made a 90-degree turn, right turn, and I couldn't see it, and I was looking at it. Oh, there it is. It's over to the side and to the back.
That's not a good sign.
So it wet up patellar tendon, both ligaments, both cartilages, and the Rams just. they put me in the hospital and fixed it all up. And
So there you are, Leon. You're what are you weighing while you're playing football?
I was 315. I was big for the era. I mean, most guards and centers back then were in that 280, 275, 285
Okay,
range.
so you're 315. What do you mention? You mentioned 600 at the time.
I was probably 520, 525, maybe 530, in that range.
What kind of 40 time?
Well, I was 485, 49. I was pretty quick for a bit there. And
that's pretty good 40.
That's, yeah. I mean, for me, 315 pounds was light. So, I had good legs and good strength. And you know what, Steve, I couldn't run that after that injury, but that's what my 40 time. Coming out of college, I was legitimate height. Well, 6'3" and 5'8", and that was with an NFL measurement stick. And they're pretty rough on that height. They don't give nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And 6'3" and 5'8", and I was like 315 pounds, and I did a single rep at 5 1/4, and then did that 2 1/4. I did it 54 times, and an NFL lineman today is doing it 35 or 40. So I was pretty strong. I had a lot of endurance on that rep, but you just got to remember the NFL back then wasn't doing blood testing for any kind of substances that might be in your body. So we were able to take advantage of things that they're not necessarily able to take advantage of today.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I hear what you're saying loud and clear. So you go from having all the materials, all the size, the speed, the strength to be a dominant offensive lineman in the NFL. You get your leg cut out, you blow out the patella tendon. The Los Angeles Rams. Plan B is you go back to Bell and start selling real estate. Did you graduate from Colorado and get a business degree to do that?
At the University of Colorado, I did graduate with a business degree, and when you said I went back to Bell, that was I believe I made a mistake in my notes. No, I came back to Boulder when I stayed in L.A. I got a pretty good bonus, and I had bought a fourplex right there in North Long Beach. It was about three blocks off the beach, and I was living in that big 3-bedroom apartment on the ground floor, and then I had 3 2-bedroom apartments in the back. So first thing I did was put that up for sale, and realized there was nothing for me in L.A. And growing up there, I had 2 sets of friends. I had friends that were Los Angeles Rams friends, and once you're not part of the team, I mean, it's kind of weird. You get hurt, and they don't want you around because it's kind of a bad omen.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so it wasn't like I was going to be buddies with these guys. And then your buddies in high school that were still living in Bell, and that is inner city LA. That's South Central. Bell and Southgate and Huntington Park and all that. So that was a whole different life for me, and I didn't want to get back into that environment. So the first thing I did is I ran back to Boulder, Colorado. And Boulder, Colorado, in that era was a small little sleepy town, and predominantly white and safe. Let me put it that way, safe for me, because I was a type of individual that could have gone either way at that point.
Right.
And so I got my real estate degree and went to class and passed that test, started selling real estate.
Well, man, so you're in your early 20s right now, and you spent a big part of your life in the business of professional wrestling, but you haven't mentioned it one time really basically as a part of your growing up. Did you watch the business as a kid? Were you a fan of the business back in the day, or was it purely, I'm a football player and that's it?
No, that's a good question. I saw myself, to be honest with you, as a football player. I was gonna play 15 years and make as much money as I could and pay off my house and have a family and then get into coaching football.
Right.
And I think that I've missed my calling because that's my passion is coaching, and I'm good at it. I'm just flat out good at it. And someday I hope I get an opportunity to be in that situation where I can coach young kids, whether it's football, baseball, wrestling.
Well, what about coaching some pro wrestling? I mean, to me, watching your mannerisms in the ring, I was watching a lot of old footage of you. One of the things that I've always liked about you was just your mean streak. Just when you opened up on a guy, your demeanor, your body language, and guys, as simple as that may sound, It's a little more complex than it actually is, because some people totally miss the boat on that. And did you always have that mean streak? And I'm not talking as a mean human being, because everybody knows you kind of knew you was a big teddy bear, and you could certainly have your moments. But in the ring, as I would probably assume on the football field, you had that killer instinct and the drive to just be dominant. And to me, in football and in wrestling, you must possess that.
I don't know, Steve. I've as a football player and as a wrestler, let's just take wrestling. When I walked into the arena, I got into character. I mean, the minute I got out of that car and grabbed my bag and parked in the underground parking. Let's say we were at CNN Center in Atlanta. We'd get there early, and we'd park that car underneath in that underground parking, and I'd grab my bag and I'd walk into that arena, and I'd get in character. I became Vader at that moment, and there was two distinct, individuals, I guess that happened for me, and I started becoming Vader. As I was lacing up my boots, as I was putting on my mask, and as I was going over my match, I didn't think as Leon White anymore, because as Leon White, I guess I'm just a different person. I don't really want to speculate on who I am or who I've become
right
later on in life. But and I guess I did the same thing in football. And I when I was a young kid growing up, I would go over to the high school and I would watch it, and I would see the size and the strength of these guys, and the aggressiveness, and the coaches screaming and hollering, and that was just instilled in me. And I guess growing up in Compton, California, I mean, and I'll tell you a quick story, and this is a little personal. I don't feel bad about sharing it. My father's passed away, and he was a good man, but he had his problems with the alcohol. I mean, obviously there was no drugs or no pills involved back then, but he was a big guy, 6'4", 270 pounds, and he lifted weights, and he was big, strong, and powerful, and he worked hard. He got up at 4 a.m. and welded all day, and he'd come home and take a nap on the couch and get a shower, and he'd go up and he'd go out and have a good time. And one night he took my mother with him, and they were out, at one of the local bars, maybe 2 or 3 miles from the house, and my sister and I were sitting there, and we were watching. I remember this. We were watching that original series of Star Trek. You may be too young for this.
Oh, no, dude, I was a big Star Trek fan. Go ahead.
Man, I'm a huge, still am a huge Star Trek fan. But I remember watching Captain Kirk on that black and white TV, and me and my sister were there, and boy, three men were coming through the back window, and one guy was already in the house, and he was pulling through the second guy. So he was standing on my bed pulling the second guy through, and the third guy was pushing. I could see the third guy out the window, and I froze for an instant. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and boy, I'll tell you what, I screamed at my sister, and I said, "Run!" And boy, I went over there and grabbed her hand. She froze, and we ran out that front door, went down to the neighbors, called the cops, and of course they had left, and it was close. I had no idea what they would have done. I had no idea what they were doing in there. My dad had some guns in a gun case. He was, he had some pistols and shotguns, and he'd take me hunting on the weekend. We'd drive out and shoot some rabbits and cook them and eat them. And I don't know what. I mean, we obviously didn't have nothing, so I don't know why they were in there. And I think they were up to no good. My sister was a couple years older than me, and she was a pretty little thing. So it scares me to think about what would have happened. But my buddy knew where my dad and my mom was, and called up that they were having a beer. And like I said, it wasn't something that was out of the ordinary for us. But this next thing that happened, my dad came back and got a 20-gauge shotgun, gave me a box of shells, and said, "Leon, you know how to do it." Cops had left, and he said, "You know how to load this thing, and you know how to use it. I've taught you." He says, "If they come back, you know what to do." And he took a board and some nails and a hammer, and real handyman, and he boarded up that window, and he went back out and finished drinking. And so I was 8 years old at the time. My sister was 10, and that might tell you a little bit about the my ability to turn it on and turn it off.
Right.
And at times in my life, I've had trouble turning it off. You got to be Vader for so long and so meaningful. I mean, sometimes I think I went overboard in the character, and I guess it made me real believable. And maybe I look back and think I might have got into that character too much, might have worked a little too stiff. I'm sure I would have had the better success, especially in the WWE, had I been able to tone that character down and work within the framework of that particular company. And then I think that's important in professional wrestling. You have to, if you're a coach, you have to coach from the position of flexibility, and if you're a wrestler, you have to wrestle within a parameters of flexibility. But Steve, just to answer your question, get back to, you said, were you always going to be a football player? My high school PE coach was an Italian dude, and he worked for a company down in downtown Los Angeles, and every Friday night they had shows, and we would catch a bus, and his name was Coach Ferragamo, about 5'9" and 240-pound Italian guy. And he worked under a mask, and we'd go down there, and we were mesmerized by it. So I was always a wrestling fan, but obviously I gotta be honest. My first love was football, and that's what I pursued. But I was fascinated by the whole thing about stepping outside of that curtain. And regardless if you're having a good day or a bad day in your life, it just goes away, and you become Vader, and you get in front of however many people are there, whether there's 200 or 20,000. And boy, it's just a feeling like none other. And I got addicted to it. And shoot, I've been doing it for 30 years now. So
30 years in the business. I'm talking to Leon White from Boulder, Colorado on a Skype call. I hope the sound quality is good for everybody. It is what it is. Leon's over there. I'm over here, but we got to do some audio whoop ass for you, the working man and the working woman. I'm going to come right back from a pause, take a break, listen to some words from my sponsors who keep us on the air for free twice a week. And Leon's going to talk about how he got started in the business of professional wrestling. One day working at a gym, someone said, "Hey, I got something you might be interested in."
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Hey, it's Adam Carolla from The Adam Carolla Show. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch and bet on games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball as well. BetOnline has NHL, MMA, and championship boxing, all your betting needs in one place. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. So have some fun. Make these games and these events and these combat sports a little more interesting with BetOnline. BetOnline. The game starts here.
All right, everybody, appreciate you guys tuning in to Steve Austin Show. I'm talking to Leon White, Big Van Vader. When we left off, we got into a little bit of Vader, but we got to get before Vader, because before he was Vader, he started off in the AWA. Leon, okay, ex-football player. You watched the business a little bit. You dug it. So how do you end up getting into business?
You know what, buddy? After the Los Angeles Rams, I just got bored. I went back to Boulder and got my real estate license and started selling real estate and doing a little speculating and building a house here and selling the house. And I got bored out of my mind. I got tired of talking to women that wanted this color of curtain and this color of tile. And my goodness, I was about ready to have a fit. And I went down to the local wrestling show down in Denver, and they had a card on there. I mean, Bruiser Brody was on it, Stan Hansen, Jerry Blackwell, Kurt Hennig, Big Scott Hall, down in Denver, Colorado, at that old Denver Coliseum, and it held 8,800 people, and boy, it was jam-packed. And that was exciting, I'll tell you what. And I put on a pair of cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, and I was I had now ballooned up to 400 plus pounds, and I was in the gym. And buddy, I could bench press 600 pounds. I could squat 1,000. And my claim to fame, man, is I could take 365 pounds behind my neck and jump press that weight 12, 15 times and in a rep. And guy used to stop the gym. I mean, I don't care where I was, if I was in Venice Beach, California, and some that just everyone stopped and looked because there was no one in the gym that could do that. Not that many reps. And that was just my thing. I don't know why I was good at it. I was good at that overhead press, and they said that's a big dude and that's a lot of weight to be jerking over your head. So I was bigger than a horse, man, and had gained a bunch of weight purposely for this meeting. I thought, hey, the bigger the better, right? Because you're watching these guys on TV, and you're thinking they're all 6'8" and all 400 pounds, and TV put size on people. And I walked in there and really saw the size of people and said, damn, I gained all this weight for nothing. So, but I remember I didn't knock on the door, Steve, and I just walked in, and everybody just froze, and a guy named Bruiser Brody stood up, walked over, and I had my boots on, and Brody was about 6'5", and he had his boots on, and so we were about eye to eye. He was a little taller than me, but I had a big boot on, so he said, what the do you want in my locker room? And I said, I'm here to get a job. That's what I'm here for. And I stared him right back in the eye. And Brody, Brody was just no one to mess with, period. And we all know that. And may he rest in peace. But he turned out to be a pretty good friend of mine. And we had some hellacious matches together. But Greg Gagne was there, and a guy named Brad Riggins was there. And they come rushing over. And Kurt Hennig, they came rushing over. And said, hey, man, you can't be in here. And I said, wait a minute, man, this is who I am. And, I live right down the road, and I played football at the University of Colorado, and I played for the Los Angeles Rams, and I had my Super Bowl ring on, and, I was ready.
Right.
And Gene Reed, the promoter, and may he rest in peace, he said, yeah, I know who Leon is. We need to talk to this guy. And he calmed everyone down, so Brody went and sat down.
Hey, let me jump in here real quick, Leon, because first of all, to all my fans out there, I'm sure you can assume that the professional wrestling dressing room is super kayfabe. Now, if you go way back about 25 years or 30 years when Leon's talking about he first walks into this dressing room, you're talking about triple kayfabe. I mean, dude, you just walked in a badass area where the business was protected, and if you were just some unbeknownst fan just thinking you're going to walk in on a meeting or what the boys are doing, it's a good way to get your ass handed to you. So it was absolutely crazy. So what possessed you to even just get the idea to go in there and say, hey, I want a job?
Well, like Steve, like I said, I was going crazy selling real estate.
You must have been.
Out of my mind. And like I said, I got a pair of jeans on and a tight T-shirt, and I was 415 pounds, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to do it. And I stood by that door. I stood outside that door for an hour. Probably at least an hour before I had the guts just to push it open or open it up and walk in.
So what happens? What are you thinking when Brody comes up to you face to face and you've only seen him as a fan sitting in a chair? He's in the ring doing his thing. And, of course, Brody's one of my favorite all time. And he had that look and that intimidating presence, that the size. And, again, you're a big man, but you're talking about Bruiser Brody, the guy you've been seeing on TV. So, I mean, when he comes walking up to you, what are you thinking?
You know what? I about shit my pants.
Yeah.
But straight up, I was scared to death, but I wasn't going to show it.
Yep.
And I stared him right down in the eye and said, man, I'm here to get a job. And, buddy, I was scared to death. My knees were shaking, my hands were shaking, and I was scared to death because, like I said, you watch wrestling on TV, especially back in those days, and you thought these guys weren't just tough, they were crazy and tough. And so it took a lot of nerve to do that, but things calmed down real quick, Steve. And Brad said, "Listen, let me get a pen and paper before something happens." And Brad Riggins he wrote down his name and number. He says, "You're serious? Call me." And Greg Gagne said, "Well, we appreciate you coming in." And Gene Reed had come over and shook my hand and said, "No, this is Leon White. He was, we had an appointment. I didn't think we'd meet in the locker room like this." And Gene was getting old, but Gene calmed everyone down. And next thing I know, man, I got my bags packed, and I'm in my car on my way to Minnesota. And boy, Brad Riggins, what a trainer, what a career he's had, because he's put out some big names, And I can't name them all, but
yeah, no, he's trained a lot of great guys. So, but what was training camp like for you? Because you always hear the standard, okay, we're going to do Hindu squats and push-ups, or it's all conditioning. What was Brad's methodology? I mean, was it learning how to take a bump? Brad obviously is known for his Olympic level wrestling, great amateur background. So, what was his protocol to teach you, who would go on to become Big Van Vader, but right now you're still Leon White?
Well, buddy, he broke us into groups, and there were some kids there that maybe didn't possess the athleticism, and he knew what he was doing. He was really good at what he did. And we started off with a 2-mile run, and at 415 pounds, that was it for me. I'd finished that 2-mile run, and it was like it was time for me to go back to the hotel, and in reality, it was just the beginning.
Right.
And then we got started for a 3-hour workout, and we started out with the basics, locking up, and Brad, he liked to shoot with us. He wanted to see what you were made of, and he said, "Do you have any wrestling skills?" And I said, no, but Brad is, if you look at him, he's what, 5'8" or 9, and you say, well, heck, I could handle this guy. But the bottom line is, this guy is built like a fire hydrant, built like a Coke machine, and stronger. Back in this particular point in time, he was training for the 1980 Olympics, and then Carter pulled the United States out of it, which cost Brad millions of dollars and probably that gold medal, because he was the odds-on favorite to win the gold.
Right.
And this guy wasn't just tough; he was super tough. He might have 5'8", 5'9". He might have not looked like Superman, standing there in front of you. And here I am at 6'4", legit, according to that NFL tape, and 400 plus pounds, and bench throwing all this weight around. And I said, well, heck, I just walked up and stood in front of him, and he said, pair up. So I just walked over to him and thought, well, heck, I'll just throw him around and show him what's up. And,
show Brad Riggins what's up. Keep going. This is great.
Well, Brad Riggins, he was, you talk about a wrestling fanatic. He had a big, nice house, 4 or 5 bedroom home. And he had a enclosed, because we're talking about Minnesota, enclosed pool, jacuzzi, everything. And, he filled it up with dirt and cement and just poured that pool over with cement so he could start his wrestling school. And I always thought, what a shame to cover up that beautiful pool and that beautiful jacuzzi. But he did leave this little portable, in other words, it was a toilet, and what he had done is he had built a little square around the toilet so that, you didn't have to go in his house. His wrestlers didn't have to go in his house to use his restroom.
Right.
And boy, we locked up and we started moving, and, I had good feet work, and I was kind of pass blocking him and really didn't know what I was doing. And we got rougher and rougher and rougher and rougher and rougher. And the next thing I know, man, I am inside of this bathroom. He put my head, Steve, right through that door. Knocked it off its hinges, cracked it. My head's bleeding, and I'm on all fours, and my face is staring down in the toilet. You know what I'm saying? He got to the side of me, grabbed the back of my head, and just ran it right into that door. And boy, I tell you what, you talk about an attitude adjustment, buddy. I got up out of that. I got up and I was madder than hell, and I kicked that door, and that door went flying. And I went over and got in line and said, "Yes, sir. What's next?" And buddy, it just amazed me. This little guy just took me and handled me like a rag doll. And
that may be one of the greatest stories I've ever heard in my life. Yes, sir. But what's next? And you was going to go over there and show Brad Riggins what's up. That is unbelievable.
And he manhandled me. I put up a pretty good tussle, and for about 10 seconds, I think. And buddy, he was just playing with me, getting his feet in position, got to the side of me, and just ran my head right through that door. Blood and busted that door off both its hinges, cracked it, and flipped it over. And in other words, the door's on my back, and I'm on all fours, and I'm staring in the toilet. And the bad thing about it was the guy before me had not flushed the toilet. So, and you know what? I was at the 1,000th episode of Raw, and Vince and Hunter was good enough to bring me back for that. And Brock Lesnar, and I had never met the gentleman. And, you know, Brock is a beast, and he had been trained by Brad Wigan. And Brock was kind of looking at me, and I got up, and I went over and shook his hand and said, man, it's my honor to meet you. And we started talking about Brad, and boy, I brought up this story, and he just started laughing. He said, Leon, that's the funniest thing I've ever heard. He said, well, you got to give yourself credit. You tried. And I said, yeah, I didn't try very long, buddy. But
hey, well, what other kind of were there any other guys that were in the class with you that ended up making it in the business or making it big time?
Buddy, you know, Rob Steiner was down there, and he had already went through a school, but I think he was hanging on. He was hanging around Minnesota trying to get on with the AWA, so he was coming to the class, and you know, he was kind of helping out Brad. You know, he was a student, but he was an experienced student.
Now, what was your thoughts early on Steiner? Because man, that dude, you talk about compact, dense, muscular, and super strong, and a good shooter. What was your impressions of Rick Steiner early on?
Well, it was Rob, not Rick, and.
Well, I know it was Rob, but he would change his name to Rick because their name was Rob Rick Steiner, but it was Rick Steiner. So anyway, Rob Steiner.
Yeah. Well, you know, if you just think about that story I just told you, and Rick was a heck of a college wrestler too. He was an All-American. He didn't go as far as Brad did. So I kind of had a newfound respect for anybody that was a wrestler, whether it was high school, college, or especially the Olympics. And he was a nice guy, and he was very helpful, very instructive. You know, we got along good, but you know what? All the cockiness in me was gone, and I was there to learn and work hard. But he, you know, what a physical specimen! My God, back in that day, just like you said, compact, strong, quick, just.
I remember seeing him. I guess first time I started seeing Rick Steiner, I think he was still going as Rob Rick Steiner back then in Power Pro Mid-South. I think he was working for Bill Watts, and I saw this guy, and I was like, Jesus Christ. 5'11", maybe, and maybe 250, but I mean the most dense, 250 pounds, and strong as hell. You could just see what he was doing on television, but just totally impressive. So you guys are there at the school. How much training did Brad put you through before you got into your first match inside the squared circle?
Well, you know what? A lot of what Brad did, you know, first thing he wanted to do is see if you had what it took, and it was all about the physicality. In other words, when we wrestled, we shot. It was just conditioning. You know, he'd do squats, he'd run you, he'd put you on the bike, we'd hit the ropes, we'd do push-ups. So if it was that type of thing, and if you got through, if you survived that, and then he started teaching wrestling. But he wasn't going to waste his time and teach everyone. Like you said, it wasn't just kayfabe back then. It was triple kayfabe.
Right.
So he wasn't going to give up the business till he thought you were going to make it.
Right.
And, you know, you get a class of 15, 20 kids, and, you know, that would dwindle down to 4 or 5 pretty quick. And, you know, I'm sure Brad got his money up front, so it didn't matter. He narrowed it down, and I made that cut, and I wasn't going nowhere. And then we started coaching, and he started coaching wrestling and psychology. And like I said, I can't say enough about Brad Riggins and his ability to coach. And, you know, I know Kurt Hennig was trained by him, Rick Rude, Scott Hall was there. You remember a guy named Berserker? He kind of had a gimmick like Brody.
Yeah.
Okay, he was down there. I mean, the list just goes on and on about who Brad Riggins had trained. You know, Brock Lesnar and on and on and on. But I went over there, and I remember Brad said, you know, had told Vern Gagne. So Vern Gagne and Greg Gagne actually came over to the camp, and we put on a little show for him. I gave him a little 5-minute match and was pressing people over my head and suplexing and moving and hitting the ropes. And, you know, they said, well, how much do you weigh? And I said, well, I'm about 420 now. I've lost some weight since I got here. And, you know, doing a couple things off the top rope. And you know, so they were impressed. And you know, I remember Vern shaking Brad's hand saying, good job, you know, we can use this guy. And AWA was running strong, and they had one heck of a talent roster, Steve. I mean, they had Michael Hayes and the Freebirds. They had Shawn and Michael. They had Kurt Hennig, Scott Hall, Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody. I mean, that list just kept going on and on of the talent that they had there at AWA at the time, and they were doing pretty good business. And that was back when we had the regional territories. New York had their territory, and the AWA had their territory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they were probably doing 20, 25 days a month, and I was getting about half of those, and was happy to get it. But
well, man, when you mention those names, Leon, I mean, just as far as a couple of them, you said a hell of a group of names there, a lot of Hall of Famers. But with the Road Warriors and then, Bam Bam, part of the Freebirds, Hansen and Brody there, man, that's a hell of a damn roster. So who were you working with in your first matches in the AWA?
The Kurt Hennig's Hall of Famer, Scott Hall's Hall of Famer.
Yeah.
Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody and Jerry Blackwell.
Yeah.
I mean, Jerry he was 5'10", and big guy, but he was 400 and nearly 500 pounds, and that guy could drop kick. So I mean, that was for me, it was a great place to watch, because there wasn't, once I got out of that camp, it was kind of like, hey, this guy is not just strong, he's real strong, and he's real dangerous because he's green and he wants to do well. So first thing they did was stick me with Bruiser Brody. And, it wasn't about, well, hey, I'm going to, teach you some psychology, but Bruiser Brody just beat the hell out of me for 3 months. And I was black and blue. And you want a Bruiser Brody story?
Yeah.
Okay. We're in Milwaukee, and there wasn't a whole lot of people. And Brody was barking around the ring, and I'm standing there looking stupid, and the referee's standing, he's barking and doing circles, and he walks over and says, kid, just relax, stay right here, I'll be back. And we were in that Green Bay, Wisconsin indoor auditorium, and it must have held 50,000 people. Brody's barking around all the people, and then took off and went all the way to the top of that stadium and was doing bark, and somehow worked his way back down, got back in the ring, walked over to me, and I'm standing there like an idiot. The bell ain't been ring, and booted me in the mouth. And let me tell you what, it was not a working boot. I took the hit on the back, and he had a chair in his hand, and the chair obviously had Milwaukee Chair Company on that chair. Okay, and it was engraved in that chair, and he hit me in the back, right in front of the referee, because his intent was to get disqualified, and that was it. He didn't like something. He was upset about something, because I remember Nick Bockwinkel was the booker, and him and Nick had some words before the match. Maybe it's because he had to work with me, because I was just greener than green. I don't know. But he booted me in the face. I went down. I got up. He took that chair and hit me in the back. Steve, I've never been hit so hard in my life, and I'm talking about throughout, as a rookie with the Los Angeles Rams. You remember a guy named Hacksaw Reynolds?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Hacksaw was just a man. I mean, he was 6'2" and 275 pounds, and boy, he got right in front of me, and he came in on a blitz and a pass, and he hit me right under the chin and knocked me out cold. And I thought that I'll never get hit harder than that in my life. And Bruiser Brody hit me with that chair, and it literally knocked me out. I went down to my face, and I was laying there in the ring, and I couldn't move. I opened my eyes, and I actually took my fingers in to make sure they were open, and I still couldn't see. All I saw was black. And I went into the locker room, and Kurt Hennig, who was just in my book was one of the all-time great individuals, just funny, fun to be around. I drove with him and Scott. Scott and I had developed a friendship back then, and Kurt Hennig. And Scott came over and said, "Let me see your back." And he starts laughing, and he got everyone around there. And on my back was imprinted the Milwaukee Chair Company, and he had hit me so hard that the lettering had made an impression on my back, and you literally could read it. So, buddy, I'll tell you what, that I've never been hit harder than that in my life. And so from Bruiser Brody, I went to Stan Hansen, and that wasn't much better. And then I finally got to Jerry Blackwell, and he had a softer side to him. He was a big tough guy, don't get me wrong, but he started teaching me a little bit, and from there I started learning. My master started improving, and
Well, let's go back to the Bruiser Brody story when he shellacked with the chair after the big boot to the gourd. Usually there's a little conversation that happens after the goings on in a match. Did you say, hey, what's up, or shake hands, or say, are you just going about your business? Because obviously you went out there thinking you was going to work a match, and not so much.
Well, no, he came up to me. He came up to me and stuck his hand out and said, Leon, that wasn't about you. I apologize. I hope you're all right. I mean, he wasn't apologetic, but he explained it, that there's some things going on. And you know what? I was in no position. I mean, again, this was Bruiser Brody. He was, making big money over in Japan and really was doing this part-time for Vern Gagne on his days off from Japan. But he had a full schedule with Baba, as did Stan. So Stan and Brody would come together, and Stan Hansen in his prime and Bruiser Brody in his prime. Let me tell you what, there was two mean cats. I mean, they could get in the ring and flat get the job done, and I can't say it without cussing, so I'm gonna let it go.
Go ahead.
They could get it done. Oh, they could fight or climb a tree. Let me tell you what, Bruiser Brody in his prime, 6'5", 340 pounds, and no fat on him, and he was in shape. He didn't drink. He didn't, and Stan the same way. Stan was, wasn't quite as tall as Brody, but about 340. And let me tell you what, man, that was a tough job.
You're listening to another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show, only on PodcastOne.
Hi, I'm Jessie Prey.
And I'm Andy Cassette. Welcome to Love Murder, where we unravel the darkest tales of romance turned deadly.
Our episodes are long-form, narrative-driven, and deeply researched. Perfect for the true crime aficionados seeking stories beyond the headlines.
Like the chilling case of Blanche Taylor Moore, the so-called Black Widow who left a trail of poisoned lovers.
Or the shocking murders of Chad Shelton and Dwayne Johnson, where family ties masked a sinister plot.
Subscribe to Love Murder on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
Now, how was the early matches with Stan Hansen? Because in a little bit we'll get to some of your famous matches in Japan with Stan Hansen with the eye incident. But how was Stan Hansen early on? You're the green guy in the business. Here's Stan Hansen several years ahead of you, a veteran and a tough one with a big name. So how were those matches with Hansen in the early days?
I've never had a match quite like the one I had with Brody, but you know what? Stan basically said, his attitude is, so you want to be a wrestler. You're a big football star and you're a big kid, and he heard all the stories about how much weight I was throwing around in the gym, and it's kind of like marking your territory, and he did that. I mean, I've taken that clothesline and just flipped me end over end, all 400 pounds of me, and I've taken his big boot, and it was kind of a process with me. I felt in my mind that there was dues to be paid, and then you had to take what they were given and keep your mouth shut and get back in the next day to a degree and for a period of time. And that's what happened with me. It's like, I took it. I felt I paid my dues. And then there came a time and a point where it just all of a sudden, yeah, you know what? I am 400 pounds and I can bench for 600. And you know what? I don't think you could do this if I don't let you do it.
Right.
In other words, there was a definite respect. In other words, I paid my dues. I gave my respect and I learned. And once I got to the point where I felt I was competent in the ring to have a match, then I started demanding to be given one, and if it didn't happen, well, then you'd have to prove it.
Yeah, but that's the process. Yeah, go and pay your dues. You're going to take some shellackings as part of that process, and along with that paying the dues comes the learning curve, and then all of a sudden you start equaling things out, and it's like, okay, now here's what the story is. All due respect, yeah, I know who you are, but this is who I'm turning into right now. So. Who came up with that? What'd you start off with there, Leon? Were you the baby bull then or bull power?
I started off actually in college as the baby bull. There was a senior All-American lineman at the University of Colorado. He just called me the baby bull. And then as I got to be a sophomore and a junior and a senior, it went from the baby bull to bull power. And then my senior year, they just called me the bull. And So I naturally took that nickname from college football and thought, hey, the bull power, and I got some leather straps around my wrists and shaved my head and put, I was going bald anyways up top, so I, got those horns and, kind of took that idea off the Road Warriors a little bit and just tried to come up with something. And so I was started out in the AWA as the bull power, or just the bull.
Okay,
and,
so the Road Warriors are there. That when they saw you do the haircut gimmick, were they saying, "Hey, this is gimmick infringement," or were they cool with what you were doing?
They didn't say a word, buddy. I mean, they were, the Road Warriors were #1 tag team in the world for a long, long time.
Yep.
And they were making a ton of money, and I always got along with Animal and Hawk, so they never said anything. And you know what, my hair was so light, and Hawk was pretty similar to mine, and then Joe's was different. But I remember having a conversation with Hawk. I said, with the way my hair is receding and getting thin, I really don't have anything else to do other than shave it. And I tried that, and that didn't look good, so I grew the horns back, and they were fine with it. They were, again, they were making a ton of money on their gimmick sales, their merchandise, and they were getting paid a lot of money. And, it didn't affect them, and it just wasn't a problem for them.
Did you see Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty were there as the Rockers, Midnight Rockers? Did you see greatness on those kids at an early age, or did you just think there was a couple of pain in the ass guys who were pretty athletic and all the girls liked them?
Well, you know what? That was the case. They were a pain in the ass, and they did have the girls. Let me tell you what, Shawn and Marty had they had a following of little girls, just, little 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old women just go from town to town, and big crowds came. They were talented, though. And specifically Shawn, he had been in the business at that time less than a year, and he could have a great match in his sleep. And he had the long hair back then, and he had the blonde hair, blue eyed, pretty boy. And then, buddy, let me tell you what, he could flat go. It was impressive to see Shawn at that early age. It was just natural for him. Marty obviously was the second part of that tag team, and was very good at himself. And he looked good and was tan. But I'll tell you what, it was impressive to watch him. And then again, that whole crew was Hall of Fame. Kurt Hennig's in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, I know. I know what you thought about Kurt. I know you struck up a friendship with Scott, and he just got into the Hall of Fame. And, of course, I followed Scott from way back. And, man, a very, very talented guy. But what were your early impressions of the Freebirds?
Michael Hayes was to me, he was the kind of the leader of that group. And, then, of course, you had Bam Bam, who was a big, talented man. The third part of that group, I forget his name, and I apologize. I'm sure you'll know.
Buddy Roberts.
Yeah, okay. To me, of all the talent that was there, to me, the Freebirds was the best act on the show. I mean, and I'm talking about from the point, and especially Michael Hayes, from the point of walking out the curtain and getting in that ring and putting on a show. And we're talking about tag team specialists. They always work 6 men. And man, I'll tell you what, I was a mark watching these guys work. And Bam Bam was what? He was right around 300 pounds, and probably, I don't know, 6'3" or 4. And buddy, he could move. He could flat get it, and he'd hit those ropes and move. And they had their act down from Japan. And
did you work with Gordy any over in Japan later on?
No, I never hooked up with him. I was with Inoki, and he was with Baba.
Right.
Him and Dr. Death hooked up quite a bit. But for the era, they were ahead of their time. Not only work in the ring, but the whole thing, the music, the hair, the look, and everybody else was kind of a step behind. But, I mean, of all that talent there, you talk about Bruiser Brody and Stan. We've been through this list. I thought the best of that group in that era were the Freebirds. They had it all.
When they came to Dallas, I was playing football at North Texas State University. I used to drive up to the Sportatorium and drink beer to watch the Von Erichs fight the Freebirds. And that damn Michael Hayes used to piss me off to no ends, which he was doing his job. And he's one of my favorites of all time. And he talked trash all day long. And then they backed it up in the ring. And he was a heat-seeking missile on the microphone. And then You had Big Gordy in there laying the heat down, and Buddy Roberts was that guy that everybody thought they could kick his ass if they just got their hands on him. And it was just pandemonium there in the Sportatorium. So I was a big fan of the Freebirds. Surprised they're not in the Hall of Fame yet, but
talking about the Hall of Fame, they've got the Four Horsemen in there, right? So they have the ability to put a group of people in, like a tag team. And I know Michael is Mr. Hayes is associated with the WWE. I believe he works for him. And I don't know why that hadn't happened, because the Fabulous Freebirds are, wow, they were 20 years ahead of their time and could flat entertain, put on a show. And, you know, probably of the three, Bam Bam was probably the best worker.
yes.
But it wasn't about individual work. It was about that team effort in the show. The bottom line was entertainment, and they flat got the job done. But I was really impressed with Michael and the look, and like you said, he could get it on the mic. But you know,
how was Vern to work for as a promoter?
Well, my mom always told me, if you don't got nothing good to say, you probably shouldn't say it. But you know what? He paid good money.
Yeah.
And you know, if you were on the show and he did well, you know, I thought he was fair, especially to me just starting out. And you know, Greg Gagne was actually running the show, and Vern kind of took a back seat, and then there was a gentleman by the name of Big Otto Vance that had actually had the world title. I mean, we're talking going back now. This was one generation of AWA talent, and then you went back to Andre and Hulk Hogan and that group with the AWA, and then they all migrated up north, up to Vince McMahon and the WWF at that time, and then he refilled it again with this new group. And you know what? I haven't mentioned the Road Warriors; they were part of this group too. But he turned me on to Big Otto Vance, and I jumped at the chance. I mean, I looked at that roster and said, well, I believe in myself, and I believe I could crack that roster and become a main eventer there at the AWA. But, you know, I like the idea of going drinking some cold beer and getting over Europe and starting out fresh and getting another style under my belt. So I took that offer. Big Otto made me an offer to come over there and offered me guaranteed money. And while I was gone, and while I was over there in Austria, and boy, it was beautiful, beautiful time of my life, and you know, had a lot of fun.
So coming out of AWA, you'd been there roughly 2 years, and so you were coming along pretty good as a hand in the ring.
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
And then you get the call. Otto Vance wants you to come down there to the CWA, and you say, "Hey, man, this is going to be a good move for you." Vern also felt this was a good move for you to get a little bit more learning and get a little bit more experience.
Well, the way it was put to me was, Leon, you know, hey, look at the talent we got in front of you, and we believe that you could become something special. But, you know, there's a long list here. And, you know, again, you're talking about the Road Warriors, the Fabulous Freebirds, and, you know, just to be on that lineup,
yeah,
to get on that card was something else. The Road Warriors, the Freebirds, you know, Jerry Blackwell, Stan Hansen, Bruiser Brody, Kurt Hennings, Shawn Michaels.
Everything you're mentioning is the main event match. So where were you on the card?
You know, I was going to save this for a little bit later, but myself and Scott Hall and Greg Gagne, you know, they were playing up the Ram thing, you know, a lot, real big, and they would tag us up, and I would get into the main event in that aspect. And we fought Larry Sabisco and Masa Saito and another big Japanese kid, and that's how Masa Saito worked with me. And Masa had Ken Patera and himself had gotten into a little trouble. I don't want to get into it,
right?
But they spent a little time in the Hooskow, and they got out. And Masa, you know, he was in. Tell you what, he was eating in prison, because he came out of prison. He was about 300 pounds and muscled up. He was in that gym every day. And he's just, you know, Masa wasn't but about 5'9" and 300 pounds, and was just
thick,
solid as your wall you're sitting next to. I mean, he was just rock hard, scary looking dude. And we got in there, and you know, he saw me move and lock up, and I grabbed him, snatched him over my head, and pressed him a couple times, and this was really basically, I had wrestled him. I was working full time for Otto and had come back for Christmas and did a couple shots for Vern. And I happened to go to, it was in Las Vegas, and there was a TV match. And so Inoki Masa Saito was then working for Inoki and said, hey, we got to get this guy. I mean, I guess they had tried to give the Ultimate Warrior the Vader gimmick and offered him the helmet and offered him the spot.
So they had the Vader gimmick already established. They were looking for the right person to put the Vader gimmick on. And we're talking about Antonio Inoki and New Japan, and Masa Saito is basically scouting you.
Well, yes, sir. That's right. And what they had done is they offered it to the Warrior and then brought him over and got him in some matches. And the thing about, in my opinion, in all of wrestling, but specifically in Japan, Steve, athleticism plays a big part. These Japanese wrestlers are as good as any wrestlers are wrestling in the world, and maybe better. The discipline standpoint, their matches are longer, they're entertaining, their finishes are intricate.
And technicality, yes.
But it's based on athleticism. And the Ultimate Warrior, I mean, he looked fantastic, but maybe it was a little bit awkward at times. It didn't have, these Japanese guys are doing intricate moves and spots. And
man, so, going back to the day, let me jump in here, Leon. Going back to the day, and of course, Ultimate Warrior just went to the Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, just passed away. I used to pay my money to go see him down there in Dallas, Texas, as a Dingo Warrior. But that gimmick, with his work style, with his work rate, not so much.
Well, not over there. Not over there. Yeah, these guys were, all these guys. You start with Inoki to Choshu and Chono and Muta and Mizawa. These guys weren't just good wrestlers. And you're talking about, they lived, eat, and breathed it. I mean, they had dojos set up and they had sleeping bags. They slept on the floor of the ring was right there, and you'd have 30 guys sleeping around the ring. They'd wake up and fold up their sleeping bags and go to work. And
hey, let's talk about that a little bit, Leon. I mean, the young boys down there, as we used to call them back in, I don't know if they still call them that, but I mean, the guys coming through the camp, the guys that were training on their way up, you talk about paying some dues, mister. Now, and you paid your dues, and I certainly paid mine. And the system changed a lot. But, man, those guys, they start off at such a young age and are so regimented in their training and the repetition and shoot-style training. I mean, you can't help but be technically good and have a vast amount of respect for the business because, man, you're scrubbing floors to doing everything else, to pay your dues, to get your foot in the door.
Yes, sir. Cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors, cooking dinner, going shopping, washing clothes. I mean, it's A to Z over there. Anyways, you know what? May the Warrior rest in peace, and my prayers go out to his family, his wife, and two beautiful daughters. But that gimmick just didn't work out for him, and so that match that I had in Vegas with Masa when I was in Europe, next thing I know, Inoki had sent over a guy named Sal Hattori, who was a referee, and he came over there, and Otto welcomed him with open hands, and I believe we were in Hanover, and I was in a match, and next thing I know, I got an offer from him to go over full time and work for Inoki, and it wasn't just more money; it was substantially more money. And Big Otto, he got pretty mad and had a few words with Hattori and said, I treated you like a gentleman, and you're over here trying to steal my top hand, because I was Otto's world champion at the time, and
right.
It was a hard situation for me because I loved Big Otto and I loved Europe, but I'm a young man and trying to buy a house for my family and feed my kid. And so it was a situation where, I just couldn't say no. And so I was off to Japan.
Yeah, but that's the way it is, Leon. I mean, you're always looking to get to the next level. And for you, it was going to be New Japan, more money. And you had the 3 world titles that you got in the CWA with Otto Vance. And I watched a couple of y'all's matches. Y'all had some bust-ass brutal matches. How was it working with Big Otto?
Tell you what, Big Otto, you know what? He was slowing down a little bit at that time.
Yeah.
He smoked a lot and he drank a lot of beer, and I think the smoking hurt him more than anything. But a big, strong, mobile guy, and we had some good matches. And talk about a baby face. He was just over like Hulk Hogan in his prime, like you in your prime. When Steve Austin came through that curtain in the WWE, that crowd exploded. Steve, I was standing right backstage one time, and you walked through the curtain. They played that music, and that glass broke, and bam! I mean, I got goosebumps. That crowd was so loud, and that's the type. It wasn't a Stone Cold Steve Austin pop, but let me tell you what, Big Otto was over in Europe, and it was the largest company in Europe, so we had crowds of 15 and 20 and 25,000 people in Bremen in that big auditorium, and And a lot of times they worked out of a tent, and I'm talking about a tent that would hold 5,000 people.
How was the lifestyle there? Because, I mean, was there a lot of travel, or were y'all basically working the same tent shows night after night and the people were coming to y'all? Or did y'all take it out on the road?
That's the other thing about it. You'd set up camp.
Yep.
You talk about the differences and the experiences that I've, from Japan to Mexico to Europe to America, and just the different lifestyles and cultures. I went over there, and Big Otto, he had bought me a little BMW, and riding on that Autobahn in that BMW going 150 miles an hour, there was no speed limit on that Autobahn. That was a kick in the butt. Let me tell you, you're late for work, you could get there pretty quick. Let me tell you.
The thing about Germany is slow drivers stay out of the left lane because it's the Autobahn, and that's the protocol. In the United States, people are so damn stupid, they won't stay out of the left lane. They want to lollygag here because they got their head up their ass. In Germany, they know how to drive, or you will get your ass run off the road.
Buddy, and you know what? That last statement, if you're in that left lane and you're doing 120, that ain't fast enough. Someone going 150 or 60 will run right into the back of you.
Yep.
When they have a wreck over there, let me tell you, it's like a train wreck. To me, that was more fun. That was a kick in the ass going to work every day in that little BMW and revving that thing up and getting going about 140, 150, and just like a kid in the candy store. I had a ball. But they wrestled rounds over there during this era, over in Europe. And the referee was an integral part of the match, where they had 4 or 5. They had 3-minute rounds sometimes. They had 4-minute rounds sometimes. They had 5-minute rounds sometimes. So the end of the first round, whatever it was, it didn't matter how long it was, but the referee would walk over to the announcer's table and act like he was doing something. The babyface would, of course, turn his back, and the heel me would, walk up and smack or kick or hit the babyface in the back. And then I would walk back to my corner. The referee would turn around because of crowd reaction, and I just put my hands up and go, well, hey, I didn't do anything. You didn't see nothing. And the babyface is complaining. So that goes on for a couple of times. And then finally the babyface, a similar situation will occur. It's all set up, and the babyface would get you back. You'd turn your back on the babyface, and he'd come over and smack you. But the ref would catch him, of course.
Yeah.
And boy, some of these big matches, I'd get away with it 2 or 3 times, and then the babyface get caught, and he'd get fined. He'd get a red card. And that red card, referee'd hold up that red card and then walk over to the announcer and say that the babyface, whomever it was, would be fined 1,000 marks. And those are German Deutsch marks, and that's a lot of money. And first thing you know, then these Germans would be all bearded up, and they'd stand up and they'd have their girl with them, and Germans are proud people, and boy, they would pay that fine. And so the deal was, we were not only wrestling and entertaining, but we were working the Carney Act, collecting money. So, we'd get some matches, some of those big matches against the top baby faces. I could set that thing up and with the referee and the baby face, and we'd get 4,000 or 5,000 marks, and they'd be paid for. Of course, the baby face he'd look to the crowd, and somebody'd say, I'll pay that fine. And we'd split that money after the match. But, that was good extra money back then. I thought that was, I don't know. I kind of liked the round thing.
I like the fact that you guys were working within the work. So tell me about the round system. I watched a lot of, World of Sports stuff, and I've talked to Steve Riegel and some other guys who did the Autobahn thing over in Germany. What did you like about the round system? Obviously, I'm assuming you get a good cardiovascular break, because I would love to have that break. But how did it play into, just from a strategic standpoint, as far as psychology and working of the match?
You kind of didn't think of it as a break. And sometimes, if you needed a break, you could take a break. And that was the big point. If you were doing 7-8 rounds at 5 minutes, and you'd get that minute, and you'd get to your corner and breathe, and, get a little water and get a towel on your face. And then other times on the shorter 2 and 3 minute rounds, you would do what we did and get some money. But I kind of liked it. I think if it was introduced right here in America, that, maybe one match per card, it might be something. It might be a good experiment to see how the people took it.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, now I'm thinking, because we're fixing to start graduating into the New Japan stuff, when you really turned into Vader. Because right now you were still Who are you wrestling at for? what was your name there with Otto?
The Bull or Bull Power.
Okay, you're the Bull of Bull Power. Now, had you graduated yet to that vicious, very stiff in-ring work style that you would be known all around the world for in Japan yet?
Yeah, I again, started out for me with Brad Riggins. And, we go back to that story where he put my head through that door. And then the way Brad Riggins taught was simply, hey, I'm going to see how tough you are before I start teaching you anything. And that goes back to what you said. It wasn't just kayfabe, it was triple kayfabe.
Right.
And then going to the AWA with Bruiser Brody. And, I just, my first match was with Bruiser Brody. And
well, you're basically fighting for your life. I mean, you're trying to show respect, but when you got a guy like Brody and then graduating on to Hanson sawing on you early on in your career, and you're a big dude, but you got to pay those respects. Boy, if you ain't tough, and obviously if Brad Riggins was weeding you out and you passed the weeding process, you were tough. God dang, that's a hell of a quick 101 on here's how tough pro wrestling is.
But you know what? You have a way of putting things that gets right to the point, Steve. But then I went from Bruiser Brody and then Stan Hansen, and just, I got hit in the Adam's apple with that big left clothesline so many times. I just thought that was the way it was. I mean, okay,
damn.
I just spent 8 months of my life getting the living kicked out of me, and this is the way it is.
Yeah.
So the first normal person I got in the ring with, and that was at the AWA, he got out of the ring and said, Leon, it was a pretty good match, but damn, he said, you're a big, strong man. You're going to hurt somebody. And I said, buddy, I don't know what you're talking about. I've been getting this kicked out of me for the last year. And I looked at him and I kind of said, thank you for the match, but I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And so I kind of carried that on over there. And I guess because of the position that I was in, being that, I was there probably 2 or 3 weeks, and Otto made me the world champion, and I didn't have the knowledge or experience to really carry the spot. It was because of my size and my ability to press people over my head and come off the top rope and do a moonsault. And they just hadn't seen that out of a 400-pounder before. So, he put me in that top spot right away. And what I had done is there was a referee that had been in the business 40, 50 years. His name was Jeff Jeffries and a guy named Mick McMichael. And they had both been in the business 40 or 50 years, and they had wrestled. They were 2 smaller individuals, so they had great referees. They had great knowledge of the business. I'd take that money, and I would pay them to meet me in the arena or the tent, whatever it was, during the day. Say around 2 o'clock, I'd get up in the morning and eat breakfast and go to the gym for an hour and a half, and then come and work with those guys for 2 hours. And they said, Leon, we're going to start over from scratch. I mean, we're going to teach you how to lock up, how to take it on, and how to do this, and how to properly, so you can get up to that top rope, because you're just a big athletic guy, but you're not doing it right. There's a way to get up there. And they just basically retrained me. Not that Brad Riggins had done a bad job, but basically they kind of put some fine touches and some finesse on.
Right.
I call it the accumulation of the little thing. If I was doing 20 things wrong, they would just take one thing a day and fix it. And I believe that helped me a great deal.
Well, that that shows a lot of gumption on your part to be smart enough to say, hey, man, can you guys help me out? And to go look for some extra help in an effort to speed up your process or round out your game, or to take your personal game higher. So when you're working these matches with Otto, now Otto was, like you said, he was smoking a little too much. He drank some, but he's a big dude, and he was over like Rover. So with your snug style, was he saying to you, hey, Leon, hey, take it easy a little bit out here? Or was he game for whatever you brought? See, that's the difference. The European style, the Japanese style, and especially the Japanese style. It was just the opposite. Now, Otto was saying, the plan for my company is based around you being my world champion, and, I'm going to create this monster out of you, and you have to show it in the ring. He said, I'm telling guys that I'm telling you to work stiff and to become that monster. Wow.
I mean, when you hit somebody, hit them. And he said, do the same with me. I'll never forget, one of the matches I had with Cactus Jack, and he came up to me and said, Leon, I want you to cut my face. I want you to break my nose. And this was kind of the attitude that I was given, from Otto. He said, these guys that are working with you, I know you're going to lay them in, and we want you to lay them in, and we're going to create this, and we're going We're going to do some business. And he said, you know, you can't put people in the hospital, but we want you to work stiff and we want you to work snug. And it was successful for me. And then, you know, of course, going over to Mexico, it was pretty much the same thing. Going over to Japan, I mean, I sat down in a room with Inoki and Masa Saito, and they said, listen, just go out there and be a monster. Do whatever you want to do, but get over.
All right, you got Antonio Inoki and Masa Saito sitting you down, telling you, hey, go out there and be a monster and get over. Y'all heard that?
Yeah.
They told Leon White to go out, be physical, and get over. And that's why I'm bringing today's show to a close. Done sit here and talk to Big Leon White for a hell of a long edition of this Steve Austin Show.
Thank you for joining us for another classic episode of The Steve Austin Show. Please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends. For more Steve Austin Show, go to PodcastOne.com. That's PodcastOne.com.
Just when you thought summer couldn't get any hotter, Pluto TV is turning up the heat with thousands of free movies. Presenting Summer of Cinema. Stream your favorite blockbuster films like Gladiator.
I will have my vengeance.
Good Burger.
This is what I call fast food.
Beverly Hills Cop. The Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. And Julie and Julia.
Bon appetit.
All for free on your favorite devices. Pluto TV. Stream now. Pay never.